to pay $75 for this dress, which is less than half.
I'm going to explain how when you say that you only willing to pay $75 for a dress that's $195, you're basically telling the brand to do slave labor. I'm going to do a whole full explanation on this. As someone who's worked in the fashion industry for over 30 years for over 50 plus brands, I can tell you that this is roughly the setup of a brand like Cezanne. The amount of employees they have, excluding the salespeople, the overhead, you know about the raw materials, and then you only know about the external contractor, which is the sewing factories, but they also have other external contractors. When you say that you only will pay $75, a brand like Cezanne makes roughly about a 55% markup. That means that they have $33.75 to pay for the raw materials and the sewing factory. Then this remains like $41.25 has to pay everyone else. The $33.75 would mean that it has to cover the cost of the raw materials and the sewing costs, which you know about. But what you don't know about is that there are additional costs, for shipping. What we call landed duty pay, LDP, right? So that involves like the shipping, because a lot of things are produced offshore, right? So it requires shipping, whether it's by plane or by boat. It needs a mode of transportation to ship the goods in from whatever country it's produced in. And then you need a freight forwarder to clear customs. And then you also need to pay duties on the goods that's made offshore, and that's taxes. And then you also need to, pay local truckers, because someone needs to pick up the goods, whether it's from the airport or from the port of the ship. These are additional costs that you're not factoring in. That means the remaining $41.25 need to cover all the salaries of the people who work at Cezanne, excluding the salespeople, the overhead, excluding the storefront, and there's also additional costs in the raw material. People forget about packaging, and then there's also external contractors that need to get paid. So everything that's not highlighted needs. People need to get paid with that $41.25. So when you say that you only won't pay $75, I just want you to know the message you're also giving is that you're telling the brand, like, how dare them to have the audacity to want to turn a profit so they could reinvest back into the company by paying their employees a decent salary, giving them raises, hire additional workers, so the staff isn't, overworked. How dare they, right? And how dare they want to expand in their business by, putting more products out if they need to, or opening more stores because, the brand has grown. How dare a business wants to operate like a business? This is the message that you're giving. And because a brand like Cezanne and a lot of these fashion brands, they aren't what you think. They are not the sewing factory that just buy the garments and make the clothes. There's actually like a whole business behind it. So the way the business is set up is, there's a wholesale structure and there's a retail structure. So when you are talking that you are paying about $75, essentially the factory only gets $15.19. This is what you're essentially saying. Like, this is how much, they are getting. Slave labor bullshit kind of nonsense. I've seen quite a bit of your content. So you talk about polyester. It's not just you, it's a lot of, content creators talk about polyester. We know that it's not environmentally friendly, it's not sustainable. So I understand the topic conversation, bringing awareness to it, but there's also misconception that just because it's unsustainable and it's, not friendly to the environment, that it costs penny on the dollar. I can guarantee you, as someone who's done a lot of costing for brands, that it's not pennies on the dollar. Depending on the quality of the polyester that you get, I can tell you that some of the costing of the raw material itself, and just in polyester, it could come up to $33.75. Again, it's about the quality. It's like when you go buy a dozen eggs, you could buy a generic brand, it's $1.49 now, and you could buy organic eggs, it's $3.59. Check it out. And the other thing that irks me, nothing that, I've seen that you have talked about, but it's just a whole idea that just because something is made in China, that is somehow like, it's made in China, it's shit, it's crap, it's inferior, da, 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 da. It's sheer other fucking nonsense. Trust me, as someone who's worked in production, who's worked in the industry for over 30 years for a lot of brands, have gone to factories in China a lot. Like, the quality in the factories, it depends like on which factory you're working with, right? I could tell you that there are high-end factories that would rival and excel and exceed the expectation that you would, expect from Italian factories. And then there's also Italian factories that put out crap that you would expect, what you think Chinese factories would put out. So this misconception, I just wish that, people who do not work in the fashion industry really like zip it in this topic unless you have gone to the factories, visited, or you have some kind of insider knowledge. Because just to regurgitate nonsense off the internet is sheer other nonsense. It drives me crazy because it's again endorsing slave labor. I want to add to the point right now, because the workforce in China in sewing factories is shrinking. So the cost of producing things in China is not as cheap as it used to be. So this is also why when you see things made in China, the pricing has increased. And for all of you who complain you know, about the cost of goods and stuff like that, it's because there's 2.5 generations of consumers that grew up with fast fashion. So you don't understand like how much things cost, because again, like we've seen like, with scandals like Rana Plaza and things like that, like these fast fashion brands are just doing slave labor, having sweatshops and all this unethical practices. So this is what you are trying to message, when you are saying like something should cost $75. I wouldn't pay $195. $195 is fair pricing. For a brand like Cezanne, who is sustainable, they actually have to buy material that needs to be certified. So the mills have to get their fabric certified with any one of these companies, right? And the certification costs money. It costs quite a bit of money. So that money is padded into the goods. So that's why the raw material isn't as cheap. The fabric isn't as cheap as you think it is. For a brand like Cezanne, who is sustainable, they also have to get audited. So you think those audits are free? So when you say that you are only willing to pay $75 for something that's $195, it's just like, if you can't afford it, then don't buy it. The brands do not owe you anything. They owe it to themselves to make money. This way they could pay the employees, they could keep the overhead, they could pay fair pricing. We'll be doing a brand review of Cezanne soon about the fit, the quality, and the value, if it's worth it. I know that you're a recent follower of mine and you have quite a bit of followers, so what you say does impact the way your followers think about fashion. And I hope that after explaining it, that you get the message, of how fashion works, and you could stop promoting like this mindset of overconsumption and lowering costs and essentially like promoting slave labor. I just want to clarify that. If you want to learn about fashion, feel free to drop in a comment. My channel here on TikTok is to teach you about personal style and fashion education, so you know what you're spending your money on. So go to my site, jodyjan.com, and book a session with me today. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button to follow my YouTube channel for personal style tips and fashion industry hot takes.